Hi, everyone. Good evening. Thanks for coming out tonight. So Abe is a senior software engineer at Enigma Public, and they're a search and discovery platform for open data. He also teaches at Pratt, and he also co-organizes a meetup himself, GeoNYC, which is a meetup around technical and social aspects of maps. So please welcome Abe.
Thank you. I'm really glad to be here. I've never been to the UX and Data Meetup, so I hope to come back and not be the one up here talking next time. Because I'd love to learn more about the different speakers here and obviously the culture of this meetup. As Kim mentioned, I do co-organize a meetup called GeoNYC for enthusiasts on mapping, and it's amazing how different the audiences are for some of these technical meetups. So I'm really excited to get to know all of you tonight. We're going to start with looking at the word curiosity, kind of what it means to me and what it means to you. When you think about public data, you might not immediately jump to the words curiosity and inspiration. But tonight, I'm hoping to change your mind on that a little bit, to show you that public data is not boring. A lot of you, though, probably already know that. Public data contains a lot of factual information, but it also contains insight that can only be discovered through creative exploration. So I'm hoping that you will understand that at the end of this, because it's been something that I've been really excited about as in my work at Enigma and specifically at Enigma Public, and so I'm really excited to share that with you tonight. So the three examples you may have seen the talk description. We're going to cover three different examples of insights in public data. One of them is just down there creepy, and it's kind of scary. The second one is a little bit fishy, and the third one is refreshingly human. So we're going to cover all of that. But before I get to that, I want to tell you a little bit about me and how I came to understand my love for this sort of curious aspect of technology and data in particular. So my name is Abe. I'm an engineer with a creative background. And I should also add that I forgot to mention that I also do teach. Usually I'm teaching to people who don't have technical experience. These are people that are maybe looking for mid-career change into a technical field, or they might be undergraduates who have never programmed in their life, and they're maybe learning Python or something like that. And it's amazing to me that the perspectives that these people bring, you would be surprised at the implicit biases and mindsets that come from studying engineering in the traditional path versus doing something else and having a lot of diverse interests and then coming to technology through that route. And so I really like working with people like that because they don't have all these preconceived notions of what technology is supposed to be. So my work in engineering and in technology has focused around how can we use technology to bring people together, how can we use technology to create delight and wonder, and create a little bit of whimsy in an industry that is known for a lot of not fun, I'm trying to say. One project that I've worked on in the past in particular that I think is worth mentioning as we explore this idea of curiosity in technology and public data was my master's thesis. So I did my graduate studies at ITP at NYU, that stands for Interactive Telecommunications Program, but that doesn't really mean a whole lot. Usually people just say ITP. And it's basically like a 2-year art meets technology equals insanity kind of program. So my master's thesis was a project called Internet Explorer, not to be confused with everyone's favorite web browser. And the goal was to create a more serendipitous web browsing experience. So think about the ways that you use the internet today. Something pops into your head, you go to Google, you type it in, and you get links to information, right? That is 99% of how the internet works. But what I was interested in exploring is, what if you don't know what you're looking for ahead of time? How can you even use the internet if you don't know what you're looking for? And so Internet Explorer was a map of around 4 million web pages I shouldn't say was because it actually still exists, although the data is quite outdated now. But you could kind of jump in this galaxy of web pages and end up finding things that you didn't know you were even interested in. Now, this may not be the most practical thing in the world. It's certainly not going to help you do laser-specific research in a particular topic, but what it can do is expand your knowledge of certain areas that you didn't know you were interested in, and it can lead to interesting things. I sort of liken it to, in the old days, you might have, if there was like your favorite bar, and you wanted to verify when the bar was open, you might have to walk there and check the sign. Along the walk, there would be things that could happen. There's like 8 million random variables in life. A truck could pass by and there's a logo of a business. You say, oh, I need a new air conditioner. Or there might be someone that you run into on the street and it rekindles a friendship or something like that. When you type in the bar on Google and you get the information in a fraction of a second, that sort of cuts out that experience. And so my approach has been to try to bring some of that, the more fun side of finding things in the world back to the technological experience. So fast forward to today, I am a senior software engineer at Enigma. A little bit about Enigma. Obviously, I said we're hiring. We're still hiring as of now. Enigma is a data technology company, and we partner with cities and enterprises to solve real-world problems using data. But what I'm most proud of at Enigma is my work as technical lead of Enigma Public. So Enigma Public is a search and discovery platform for public data. What that means is we have gone out and found tens of thousands of public data sets from disparate sources and brought them onto one platform. So we've taken a lot of the legwork out from gathering data that, if you're a US citizen, is sort of entitled to you, this information that the government publishes. We put it in all one place where you can easily browse it and gain insights to it that maybe you wouldn't have the technical skill to do otherwise. And so that's kind of a little bit about me and where I'm coming from on this. I think that Enigma Public is a good example of just doing something for the public good and organizing stuff and letting people go to town and browse and look for things that interest them. And so that's really the key to this is whatever your experience or your background, public data has stuff for you. You just might not know it exists yet. And so hopefully after the end of this, you'll be able to find it. So we're going to enter the matrix now. And we're going to do just a little crash course on public data. For those of you who might think you know what public data is or you've worked with it extensively, I think it's good to just go over it so we can all be on the same page of what we're actually talking about when we say public data. So public data contains things that you might expect. A lot of public data, the traditional form of public data comes from government agencies. So this could be at the federal level, this could be at the state level or the city level. And a lot of these agencies keep track of things like liquor licenses, corporate registrations, even campaign contributions. So if you've donated more than $250 to candidates in an election cycle, your name is part of a public data set that records that. How many people knew that? How many people didn't know that? Okay, you'll think twice next time before you donate. So public data also contains things that you might not expect. So there are many cities in the US that publish lists of dog names. And I could be a little bit more specific. Cities usually have some sort of licensing system for pets and in particular dogs. They also are increasingly aware of vicious dogs that might attack the public. So some cities have regular data set of all the licensees and some have special data sets. It's like, these are the bad dogs, beware. So that's kind of interesting, right? You might be thinking like, well, who cares about that? But what you can do is kind of understand the people around you in your neighborhood. I have a student who actually created his 8-week project on the New York City dog names data set. And what he was left with was a map of every neighborhood by its census tract of the most common dog name for that area. You'd be surprised, there's a lot of overlap. We're not very, I don't know, we need to think out of the box for our dog names, I think. But the crazy part was, one of the other students in the class used that map, asked around in his building what their dogs' names were, and a lot of them were actually reflected on the map. So it was like a confirmation of the world that we live in, which was pretty cool. So the next one, I'm just going to highlight, the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, they keep track of licensees for radio transmitters. And that sounds rather boring. But when you consider that one of the most frequent holders of these licenses turns out to be McDonald's Corporation, does anyone want to guess why that might be? Yeah.
Drive-through?
Drive-through, exactly. So every McDonald's drive-through has, well, most of them these days have wireless communications between the drive-through little portal and the main building. And those are all licensed by the FCC. So if you filter this by McDonald's, you're effectively generating a map of every McDonald's location with a drive-through in the US. That's not something that you could predict based on the title of this data set, but it's something that with a little additional exploration you can come up with, and I find that pretty interesting. And then the last one, honey production. Besides being delicious, we all love honey, but it can also help us understand crop yields, and it can also help us understand allergy season. So a lot of there's a big correlation between, obviously the pollen count, but just how our farms and how our gardens are doing based on how happy the bees are, in turn, how much honey is being produced. So there's a lot of insight in there, and it's just waiting to be unlocked by people who ask the right questions of it. So that sets up our first use case here of some interesting stuff in public data. And this one's called "Two Heads Are Worse Than One." So our story starts in March of 2015. I've censored this because this was actually a goat head, and I felt that I was a little bit too dark to put on a slide. There's a journalist at New York Magazine, Adrian Chen, and Adrian was following up reports that there were severed goat heads turning up in Brooklyn, as any reporter would do. So he decided to go to Brooklyn, get the scoop on the ground. This article was like 3,000 words, so it's like kind of an expose of decapitated animal heads in one of New York City's best boroughs. Great. So he did a lot of investigation. He talked to a lot of people. There were people that were like really willing to talk to him, and there were also people where he would be like, "Do you know anything about the goat heads?" And they would just fall silent and go away and be like, "I don't want to talk to you." So something was up, right? So the whole article kind of ends without a real resolution. Adrian, proposes a few hypotheses of where the severed goat heads might be coming from. But then he does something that I think is magnificent. He decides to submit a Freedom of Information Law request to the city of New York to get to the bottom of this issue. Now, he took advantage of the fact that a lot of the severed heads are showing up in city parks, and so that becomes the jurisdiction of the city government. The city tends to keep records about this stuff, so Adrian decided to ask them point blank, what information do you have about severed animal heads in New York parks? And to his surprise, the city responded. And I'm gonna back up here. For those of you who don't know what the Freedom of Information Law is, it's essentially in New York, it's a legal framework that allows citizens to request information from the government. It's sort of the bedrock of the open data movement. And there's various forms of this at the federal level. There's the Freedom of Information Act. New York State has the law, so we call that FOIL versus FOIA. And a lot of other jurisdictions have that. And a lot of other countries have that as well. So he says on February 6th, he got an email back from the Department of Parks and Rec, and he got a 64-page PDF document. There were 33 separate reports of animal heads and decapitated carcasses in parks from 2010 to 2014. So 4 years of this. Who knows what was going on before that? These are direct quotes from some of the records. I've seen as much as 7 squirrels dead in the park. There's also one, there is a dead animal head on a stick in the ground. This is crazy, right? If you're the journalist, you're like, oh man, I just blew this case wide open. So I'm going to show you a record from this data set, because this journalist actually shared the data set with the community, as any good journalist would. And so here's Exhibit A from the decapitated animals data set. This record is in CSV format, so CSV stands for comma separated value. So everywhere you see a comma in this text, that separates a field of the data. And so we can kind of walk through, we can start with some boilerplate stuff like not specified. We don't really know what that means. Number 1, we're not sure, maybe it's the first record. The third one's interesting though, body without head. So apparently there are so many decapitated animals that the New York City Parks Department has a classification system for this kind of information, which is shocking. After that, we see some dates, March 28th, 2010, March 30th. Hopefully it didn't take 2 days to deal with this issue, but I'm guessing it did. You can see that it came through a 311 call center. And the other funny part is that we keep going, we'll see DPR, Parks and Rec, general intake, closed, and then normal. There's nothing normal about this. I don't know what that field means, but this is the information, and there's a bunch of records like this that the journalist was able to get from the city. And one of my favorite parts of this is that at the very bottom, it says the Department of Parks and Rec has completed the requested work order and corrected the problem. So that's great. This is like civic responsibility in action. The citizen says there's a half of a goat in the park, and the city cleans it up. It's beautiful. So what I think we should take from this, and this is my opinion, you obviously have yours, is that, this person was in pursuit of some facts, and they couldn't really figure it out for themselves, so they decided to invoke the holy FOIA on the government. And what that enables is that this data now is in the public domain, it's structured. There's no real limit to the kinds of data that you could theoretically expose via a FOIA request. I have this little caveat in here that says national security. In a lot of cases, if you perform a FOIA request to the federal government, a lot of it will be redacted if there's information that's sensitive about national security. In this case, I don't think there's a national security threat, although at this point maybe it's too early to tell. But the real takeaway for me is that this person created this amazing and kind of dark data out of thin air using the legal framework that we all have the right to use. So I think that's pretty cool. So the next one I'm going to talk about is something that happened to me. So this is a personal story. Something bad, don't worry. But it involves a data set that I'm going to introduce, and then I'm going to kind of talk about what happened. So in Enigma Public, one of our most popular data sets by far is data from this thing called the Automated Manifest System. And we usually call it AMS. So AMS is administered by the US Customs and Border Patrol. It's essentially a list of all of the shipping containers that come through US ports. And if you can imagine the quantity of material that's coming through our borders every day, it's quite a lot. These data sets are separated by year, so there's AMS records for every year going back, I think, to when it was digitized, so probably 2012 or so. But each one of those data sets has around 20 to 40 million entries. And keep in mind that it's one entry per shipping container, and you can fit a lot of stuff in a shipping container. So there's a lot of information in here, and it's easy to take it at face value and just say, no, this is all shipping data. It's only used for commercial purposes, or I couldn't possibly find anything that's interest to me as a human in this data set. But I had quite the discovery. So I was working on a project of mine called Today in Public Data. This was several months back. It was basically using the Enigma Public API to, instead of searching public data by topic or keyword, I wanted to understand what was happening in public data today. So I queried for, in this example, we're looking at today's date, October 23rd, 2018. And you can go to this website and you can put that data in, and it'll show you all the records that mention that date or have some affiliation with that date. This example here, it's a government spending contract. It's some contract between the Department of Defense and a company called Scott Heavy Equipment. The matching date is a field called period of performance. So what I think this means is the contract, this is a period of performance current end date. So what I believe this means is today, the contract between Department of Defense and Scott Heavy Equipment has expired, or they've completed the contract. And so, well, shout out to Scott Heavy Equipment. Hopefully they did a good job. Anyway, the point of this is that now you can kind of look at data as it moves through real life and as it pertains temporally to us now. I should add, the website also allows you to go into the past or the future and look at records that come up for those dates as well. But when I was working on this, and this is something that many of you will probably relate to, I was building this website, I was using the data, and I was getting these really weird results. I kept getting records about frozen tilapia fillets. Let that sink in. Frozen tilapia fillets. So I'm coding this thing using a little subset of the data, and I'm getting the tilapia fillets. And then I'm like, well, I just must have got a lucky day. Like, this was just a big day in tilapia. I'm going to go to another day. Same thing. There were tilapia records for almost any day in my lifetime that I was looking at. So it's kind of one of those things where it's so weird that it has to be true. There's no bug in JavaScript that makes tilapia come up more prevalent than, say, pod. So I haven't seen that happen. So I had to investigate this. And so what I realized is that there are a lot of tilapia-related records in AMS. Not just for 1 year, but for many years. There's so many that for any given day, there's actually quite a high probability that there will be something about tilapia happening in this data set. So I pulled two records. The top one is from 2016 AMS, and the bottom one is from 2017. And I just wanted to understand what was happening here. And I've highlighted the fields. So the colors correspond to the fields in each record. You can see there's that orange, there's a purchase order that's off by one number, so these are clearly different shipments. You can see the yellow is a production date of October 24th, 2016, so 2 years ago tomorrow. And the best buy date, which is obviously the last date at which you can eat this without dying, is October 23rd, 2018. That's today. So the weird part about this is, both of these tilapia fillets were created on the same date, but they were shipped to the US in different years. So one is like vastly fresher than the other, which is kind of scary. So what I ask from all of you is that when you leave this talk and go home, you fire up that griddle, You get out the breadcrumbs and you start breading the tilapia fillet that you've been hoarding for 2 years. Just keep in mind, if you bought it from Walmart, that is, it says there, it might be expiring tonight. And you can also find tilapia that isn't expiring tonight using this tool. You just have to go far enough in the future. So I went a step further, as you do, and I wanted to understand exactly how many tilapia records there were. And there was a huge spike in 2014. There's around 15,000 records in 2014, and then sort of a general decline. There's also probably something technical going on from 2012 and 2013 up to 2014, because I don't think that Americans just suddenly got the taste for tilapia and couldn't have enough. At least I've never felt that way. I'm pretty sure that there's a difference in how the data is reported. That's pretty common in complex data sets like this one. But the interesting thing is that I was looking at this graph and I was trying to understand, like, why is it tapering off? And I actually was able to find an article in which it described a lot of this tilapia is coming from China. And China is actually de-emphasizing tilapia exports to the US because of some sort of like trade war with whitefish in general. So I would have never known that had I not been working on this totally unrelated project and then come across this anomaly. And I think it's a really good thing to keep in mind as you're working on whatever it is that you do. Allow for the possibility that you might find the next tilapia record in your work and go with it, because this is I'm already starting to think that I should create a spin-off site for just tilapia so that we can all just kind of learn about America's favorite fish. So you can find information you didn't know you were looking for, and you don't know when this is going to happen to you. It's something that you can't predict, but it's something that if you stay open to it and look for some of the signs of it, you can better take advantage of it. It can lead to great things.
Hey, did you look at other types of fish?
I have not looked at other types of fish. Is there a fish that you're particularly fond of?
No, my point is maybe that those two records you showed us, maybe it was just one of them was like mistyped, and they were basically done at the same time, and just somebody mistyped the year.
That's possible. They do come from. So yeah, the question was sort of, is it possible that it's just a typo and that these two records in the tilapia data are actually the same thing? There's a couple reasons why that, to me, feels unlikely. One is that the descriptions of the cargo are directly taken from the containers and the packaging themselves, so they reflect that. And there's also the fact that the records don't make it into the AMS data sets unless they were captured digitally at that time. There's timestamps for all of the sort of shipments that go through the ports. And beyond that, I think the sheer amount of tilapia that I've seen in AMS leads me to believe that is not an anomaly. This is just a common thing that happens. But this is kind of the thing. We're starting to think about this at a way deeper level than any of us ever cared to. And I think that that's cool. So the last example I'm going to present, I'm calling it a candid moment immortalized. And this one is really special to me, but not just me, but our company. So I'll get to that in a second, but I want to show you an example of a US government spending contract record. This is something that you actually saw on a few slides previous to this, when we were talking about the Department of Defense contract. But this is an example award description for a spending contract in the US. It's very short, very sweet. Demolish multiple facilities at an Air Force base according to what we agreed upon. That's not the stuff of dreams. But this thing that you're about to see is the stuff of dreams. So at Enigma, we really like public data, and we've been gathering it for 7 years now, and we're pretty good at it, and we've seen a lot of weird stuff. But when I asked all my colleagues, what is the most, I don't know, what is the most precious thing you've ever seen in public data? What is the thing that makes you, that reaffirms your belief in the power of public data? This is the record that always everyone comes back to. And it's so beloved, and it's sort of fallen into the Enigma lore so much so that we can't say for certain who found it, how they found it. But I wish we could answer that because I think it's pretty fantastic. So this is the iBrony record. We've called it that because it talks about a service called iBrony. So for those of you who don't know, iBrony was like a web portal for My Little Pony enthusiasts. And it doesn't exist anymore, but it was online as recently as, I think, 2015. And so you might be wondering, like, this is an award description in a government contract. Why, what am I looking at? So what happened was, whoever was inputting the contract information into the data set accidentally copied and pasted from their email. And I bolded that part. Careful what you write. This is my work email, and it's monitored sometimes. Smiley face. So despite the disclaimer, this little snippet of this person's life ended up in the government contract. And it's there forever. No one's going to go edit that. In fact, I don't think you can. It's a federal document. We'll never know exactly what the original award description was, but the point of this is that here's a human behind a computer that's probably doing 8 million other things and probably processed thousands of these records, and this one time they made a mistake and this personal information ended up in the government ledger. And I think this is really fascinating for a couple of reasons. The first being that public data is supposed to reflect us. And I think this is an example. This is an extreme example of how it does reflect us. It encapsulates a lot of what we do. It encapsulates the humanity of making a mistake and having that mistake immortalized in a way that you can never get back. We all know that feeling. We created public data as a society, so there's no wonder to me that it contains things like that remind us that it came from us, and no matter if there's machines working to transmit it or have machines processing it, ultimately it describes us in a way that we never thought possible. And I think the other thing that I was going to say about this record is that there's got to be countless other examples of things like this in public data. The problem is, how do we find them? And so I think the solution to that is kind of taking our curiosity and applying it to public data, either by allowing ourselves to have these experiences where we find things we didn't know we were looking for, or we can simply treat it as something that's not just for business utility, but actually contains information that might inspire us, might cause us to think about something in a different way, might ultimately lead to discoveries that we wouldn't have had before. So I guess what I'm saying is I'm encouraging you to explore public data, whether you use Enigma Public or not, and just as a reminder that it's not all business in public data, and there's a lot of stuff that we haven't even discovered yet waiting to be discovered. So that's all I've got. You can feel free to contact me. Check out Enigma Public. It's a really great way to explore all the public data that we have. And if you're interested in a job, we have a lot of openings. Thank you.
I think we have some time for questions. If you have a question, just wait for the mic.
I'm trying to mess around with some New York real estate data, and I'm finding all kinds of like data issues. I was just curious what kind of, like for example, it would say address and apartment number, but the apartment number would be empty, and it would be in the address column. You know, something like really simple like that. Just curious as to what kind of issues you guys run into, and how do you go ahead and clean up that data as well, and what kind of things you want? How do you do that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Did everyone hear that question? Okay, good. So, yeah, public data is really messy, and not everything is going to contain a description of My Little Pony. Some of it is more innocuous. Some of it is like typos. Some of it is misplaced information across fields of a data set. And so, you know, we see a lot of those things. Even today, I was looking at the address entry for a car dealership. And what happened was the year, make, and model of the car ended up in the address field. So it was like a 2018 Chevy Silverado 1500, because that's how Chevy marks the strength of their trucks. I don't know how to describe that. But that ended up in the address field, and so it was like 2018 Chevy Silverado 1500, 20 Cherry Lane, Wilmington, Delaware, that kind of thing. So that's the kind of example of what we might see. There's not a uniform way to solve problems like that, even for us. I mean, we can come up with machine learning approaches that try to validate addresses and give a probability of whether they're accurate or not. But that's like one of the hardest problems for us is doing that cleaning. And so to answer your question of like, do we do the cleaning? In Enigma Public, we don't clean data in that way. We take the data true to source. We do very minor adjustments to make sure that, say, an empty field is actually empty, or if there's, you know, a blank character there, stuff like that. But we don't change anything because we think it's important to provide people with the public data in its original form so that they can decide what biases are inherent in the data and what mistakes are there and sort of how to solve that themselves. It's not easy.
So you're importing all this data to come to class as a CSV. Sorry. Hi. You're importing, let's say, boatloads of data from a CSV file. It's likely to be poorly formatted. The only thing that you're in any way sure of is its source. You don't necessarily know what it is. You have an idea that if it's from the Port Authority, that it's shipping data. You have a good idea that it came off of a ship. Could have come off a truck, could have come off of a train, could be any of those things. But you're using, I'm guessing, AI and machine learning to figure out, okay, we got this thing and it should go here. Yes?
Well, for the example that you provided with, well, we can talk about shipping data. So the AMS data is very well structured. So there's not really a process where we have to decide where does this piece of information go, so to speak. It's more like the data, you know, there might be some more subtle issues like the encoding is messed up and we can't read it, so we have to, you know, convert the encoding or something like that. But for that kind of data, it's not really about reorganizing it so much as honoring the organization that it came with. Now, I think part of your question is talking about data where you might not know so much about where it came from, you might have an idea. In that case, good luck, because unless you know where the source is, it's very difficult. You know, you can't contact anyone to understand what the structure is, and so then you have to make some judgments. But the best advice I could give you in general about if you have to make those decisions, you should document them and at least let the next person know, hey, we made these assumptions about the data, and then they'll know what they're working with more than you did in the beginning. That makes sense.
I'm excited to check out Enigma Public now. How do you guys decide what data sets to make available? I haven't checked it out, so I don't know anything about it, but is it just a conglomerate of all these data sources as it comes in from the source, and then it's up to whoever's exploring that data to join it and make sense out of it?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the way that we determine what to publish on Enigma Public, it's taken various forms as we've grown the company. I think in the beginning it was just get as much as we can possibly get and make it public. And as we matured as a company, there were some business considerations. So it turns out that, insurers are very interested in liquor licenses because it gives them an idea. A lot of liquor license data becomes a proxy for some aspects of a neighborhood or some level of information about the economic activity in that area. So, and there's been cases where a client's like, we're really interested in data X, Y, and Z, and so we'll grab that, but with the caveat that it's not just for them, it's going to be for everybody. So we try to have the best of both worlds in terms of balancing what our customers are interested in, because they're, they have access to public data like everyone else. It's just that they might not know how to access it or use it. So we can grab that, but we can also throw it into public and make it available for everybody, not just companies. So then the topics of the data, it's really business use case and then what we internally decide we're interested in. So we have a very lively community internal to Enigma that adds high quality data sets of a lot of different topics. So I guess to answer your question, there's not really any rules around it, except if it's classified data that we can't publish. But any kind of public data that we have, we make available.
Hey, I have a question about data and how it can be seen very objectively and also very subjectively, because it's easy to perhaps rely on data for being very true or pure or something, but as you kind of just showed, maybe it's not even possible. So I'm kind of curious if you think it's possible that data be very objective, or if it should be, or if it's always subjective. Your thoughts?
Yeah, that's a great question too. So I think data is highly subjective. I think what you have to understand is that no data is actually objective in the sense that there were decisions about what to record, what information to capture, when to capture it. Someone is already just, if you go out in the world and decide to collect data, you're already making decisions about what's important and what's not important, because you can't capture everything, there's too much. So beginning with the number of fields and what those fields contain, and then the number of records and how long you're collecting the data, I mean, that right there is subjective. So you start with a framework and say, okay, I accept that there are things that I can, rely on, some factors in the data I can rely on, some that I can't. As for, numeric, statistical data, it's a good idea to dig as deep as you can in terms of understanding how the records were collected, how the measurements were taken, how, if there's a category, if there's some sort of category that the data is broken down into, try to find out, how were these categorized? Who came up with that categorization system? It's kind of like the body without head example in the captivated animals data set. Someone decided that category was broad enough, and now it's in the data. So, yeah, I think it's all subjective, but if you take that and then control on that for certain factors that you're interested in, and you're open about the fact that it's subjective, I think you can get a ton out of it.
the user community of the data sets, the folks who are grabbing data off the site, do you have a sense of who is trying to avail themselves of the data? And are there like buckets of different types of users?
Yeah, there's 3 main user groups that we have sort of focused on and tried to encourage to use the site. The first would be, data scientists, because it's really nice for data scientists to not have to spend a lot of time researching where to get the data and then try to find it in its native format and that kind of thing. So it's sort of like a one-stop shop for the data scientists to download data and play with it. We also we have a good involvement in academia, so we have a lot of academic researchers who not only use the data, but they'll write in and tell us, hey, this data set, there's something wrong with it. We had that happen with the AMS data, actually, because as you can imagine, it's rather complex and large data set, and there's a researcher at a public university in the US that consistently emails us and lets us know if there's any problems with it. And so that's insanely valuable for us, but also for them, because they get to have that data as well. And then the final group is students. So I would say we try to cater to any kind of students that are either in data science programs or are learning Python or really any kind of tech or programming based thing, because we want public data to become part of the curriculum in those programs. We want people to feel like maybe they have an idea for a project and they want to use data, but they just don't know where to find it. So we want to be a resource for them as well as the other types.
You mentioned there were some cases where the data was confidential and you wouldn't publish it. Are there any ambiguous cases where it might be confidential and people
Well, yeah, there's an example. So Enigma, a few years ago, we published an article or a blog post or something. This was a while ago. This was probably 2014, 2015. There was some, so we have FAA aircraft registrations, and we have a lot of data around aviation in the US. And there was some indication that the FBI was flying surveillance flights on US soil around major cities. And this was something that we had to decide whether we were going to publish this. It was sort of like a data viz of the flight paths of these FBI planes that had been identified by some other data source, have been corroborated. And so we were kind of faced with this dilemma of like, do we go public with this information? Do we talk about it? Do we risk, not only the future of the company, but are we breaking any laws by doing this? And so it sort of speaks to the investigative spirit of Enigma from its early days to now. But I think in the end, we decided to just YOLO it, publish it, and it turned out fine. Everyone's still here, but it was a moment where we didn't quite know what the right answer is. And obviously we consulted with people to try to come up with the best approach and a rationale for releasing that. But ultimately we felt like people deserved to know that was happening. And we also weren't the only people talking about it at the time, so I think there was enough of a public dialogue where we weren't at risk for that kind of thing. So that's just one example.
Sorry, is that there was an article on BuzzFeed a couple years ago that did a sort of data viz on that topic? I don't know if that was around the same time as.
It could be. I'm not sure who. It was actually happened like before I joined, so I don't remember the outlet that picked it up, but it could have been.
Right.
All right, let's give Abe one more round of applause. Thanks very much, Abe.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming out tonight. Our next event is going to be in just another couple weeks. We'll be back at our usual space in Workbench, and that event will be on Tuesday, November 6th. We'll be having an event called Breathing Life into Numbers, Harnessing Data and Design to Improve Communities. We'll have Laura Laterman from Measure of America, and she'll discuss the potential for data analysis and design to be deployed for the public good. She'll share some surprising findings from their most recent report, A Portrait of New York City 2018, Well-Being in the 5 Boroughs and the Greater Metro Area. So I hope you'll go on and sign up now, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks at Workbench. Stick around, meet somebody new, and have some cookies, and we'll see you soon.